The most chilling laugh in modern cinema did not echo in a theater. It ended in silence. On January 22nd, 2008, the man who gave the world its most unforgettable villain was found unresponsive inside a Manhattan apartment. The headlines moved fast, the shock moved faster. But behind the noise was a quieter, more unsettling truth. Heath Ledger did not disappear in chaos. He disappeared in stillness. On screen, his Joker felt untamed, dangerous, electric, unpredictable. Every movement looked deliberate. Every pause felt like a threat. Audiences believed they were watching controlled madness. Off-screen, the pace of his life was just as intense. Projects overlapping, expectations rising, interviews amplifying pressure. The transformation that stunned the world was not a trick of makeup. It was immersion, commitment, obsession with authenticity, and immersion has a cost. This is where the paradox begins. The performance that would later earn him an Academy Award was still unreleased at the time of his death. The applause had not yet arrived. The validation was pending. And yet, the weight of expectation was already present. Critics were watching. Studios were watching. Fans were waiting. Heath had stepped into one of the most iconic villain roles in history, and he intended to redefine it. The question is not whether he succeeded. The question is what it required from him. Over the next chapters, we will slow down the timeline. We will separate what is confirmed from what was reported. We will avoid the temptation of conspiracy and instead focus on something more complex: pressure, exhaustion, and the blurred line between artistic dedication and personal cost. Because stories like this rarely hinge on a single moment. They build gradually, through sleepless nights, creative intensity, and the quiet normalization of strain. Here is the question that frames everything. Did the role consume him? Or was he already pushing himself beyond safe limits long before the cameras rolled? The world remembers the laugh. Tonight, we examine the silence behind it. Before the red carpets, before the Oscar speeches, before the painted smile that would redefine a generation's villain, Heath Ledger was a quiet boy growing up in Perth, Australia. He was not loud, not reckless, not chasing celebrity. Friends described him as observant, someone who watched more than he spoke. Acting did not begin as a strategy for fame. It began as a way to explore emotion safely, to step inside other lives without exposing too much of his own. As a teenager, he gravitated toward performance with unusual seriousness. While many saw acting as escape, Heath approached it like craft. He studied expression, rhythm, body language. Even early on, he resisted being boxed into stereotypes. That resistance would later define his career choices. Success interested him less than authenticity. He didn't want to be liked. He wanted to be believed. Leaving Australia for the United States was not an impulsive leap. It was calculated ambition. Hollywood promised opportunity, but it also demanded reinvention. Heath arrived not as a finished product, but as a risk. His early roles introduced him to audiences as a charismatic heartthrob. The industry tried to label him quickly, but labels felt limiting, and limitation unsettled him. He began searching for roles that challenged him rather than comforted him. This internal tension shaped his trajectory. Even when fame accelerated, he remained cautious of it. Interviews reveal a man slightly uncomfortable with the machinery of celebrity. He spoke thoughtfully, sometimes hesitantly, often redirecting attention back to the work rather than himself. That instinct, to focus on craft over spotlight, earned respect, but also created isolation. Because when identity becomes tied entirely to performance, there is little room left for rest. What stands out most in hindsight is not recklessness, but intensity. Heath did not drift into roles. He absorbed them. He believed in disappearing inside characters. He valued transformation. Each project became a proving ground, not to critics, but to himself. The drive was internal, quiet, and persistent. That kind of ambition rarely announces itself as danger. It looks like dedication, and dedication is praised until it crosses into exhaustion. Long before the Joker script landed on his desk, Heath was already building a reputation as someone who would go further than expected. The world saw versatility. The case file sees something else forming, a pattern of immersion that blurred the boundary between work and self. Recognition was coming. So was expectation. When fame arrived, it did so loudly. A teen romantic lead in 10 Things I Hate About You turned Heath Ledger into a recognizable face almost overnight. Magazine covers followed. Interviews multiplied. Hollywood offered him a clear path. Charming lead, safe roles, steady ascent. It was the kind of trajectory many actors protect carefully. Heath did the opposite. He stepped away from it. Instead of consolidating popularity, he complicated it. Roles became darker, stranger, less predictable. He resisted being defined by charisma alone. With Monsters Ball, then especially Brokeback Mountain, something shifted. The performance was restrained, internal, layered. Critics no longer spoke about promise. They spoke about depth. For Heath, that mattered more than numbers at the box office. He was not chasing longevity through visibility. He was chasing credibility through transformation. Then came the announcement that divided the industry. He would play the Joker in The Dark Knight. The reaction was skepticism bordering on mockery. A former teen idol stepping into a role previously defined by theatrical brilliance? The internet questioned it. Commentators doubted it. But doubt did not deter him. It sharpened him. He approached the role not as imitation, but reinvention. Months before filming, he isolated himself to build the character's psychology. He experimented with voice, posture, stillness. The laugh, unsettling, unpredictable, was engineered through repetition. He reportedly kept a journal as the character, documenting tone, impulses, fragments of mindset. Whether romanticized or not, one thing is certain. He treated the role like excavation. He dug until something raw surfaced. On set, his presence shifted the energy of scenes. Co-stars described unpredictability, not in behavior, but in intensity. Each take carried weight. The performance did not rely on chaos, it relied on control, masquerading as chaos. Audiences would later describe it as transformative, but during production, it was simply work. Long days, psychological focus, physical adaptation. This is the moment the myth begins to form. The Joker was not yet public, but internally, the character was expanding. Heath had done what he always aimed to do, disappear into a role completely. The transformation was so convincing that early glimpses stunned even skeptics. The doubt evaporated. But transformation is not neutral. It requires energy. It demands immersion. And immersion, when sustained at high intensity, narrows the space between performance and recovery. The world would soon call it one of the greatest villain performances ever captured on film. The applause would be overwhelming. The Oscar would follow. But at this stage, none of that was guaranteed. All that existed was the work, and the cost was still accumulating quietly in the background. By the time filming for The Dark Knight intensified, the transformation was no longer theoretical. It was daily practice. Heath Ledger was not simply portraying the Joker, he was calibrating him, adjusting tone, refining gestures, sharpening unpredictability. This kind of immersion is often celebrated in cinema. It signals commitment. But immersion has a hidden cost. It blurs the boundary between performance and recovery. During preparation, Heath reportedly isolated himself for weeks to explore the character's psychology. Isolation can be creative fuel, but it can also amplify internal noise. He studied movements obsessively. He tested vocal rhythms repeatedly until they felt instinctive. He aimed not to play madness theatrically, but to make it disturbingly controlled. The work required intensity, repetition, and emotional access that did not switch off easily when cameras stopped rolling. At the same time, life outside the set did not pause. Interviews, expectations, industry scrutiny, all building quietly. The Joker was one of the most anticipated roles in modern cinema. The internet debate surrounding his casting had already created pressure. Heath was aware of it. Whether he acknowledged it publicly or not, the weight was there. Redefine an icon, silence doubt, exceed expectation. Then came the reports that surfaced later: insomnia, difficulty sleeping, long stretches of restlessness. What is confirmed is that he spoke openly in interviews about struggling with sleep during certain periods of intense work. What was reported by others after his death included exhaustion and stress. What remains unclear is how much of this was acute and how much was cumulative. The danger is not in any single sleepless night. It is in normalization, convincing yourself that strain is temporary, manageable, part of the job. Heath had always pushed himself creatively. That pattern did not begin with the Joker, but this role magnified it. The character required sustained psychological energy. Add to that overlapping projects and a fast-paced industry schedule, and the margin for rest narrows quickly. The public image, meanwhile, showed composure, red carpets, calm interviews, articulate reflections about art. There was no visible unraveling, only professionalism. This is where the case file becomes careful. It is simplistic to claim that the Joker caused anything. Art does not operate in isolation from life, nor does life collapse from a single source. What can be observed is a convergence: creative immersion, physical fatigue, mounting expectation, and a pattern of internal pressure. None of these are dramatic alone. Together, they create vulnerability. By late 2007, filming had wrapped. The performance was complete. The applause, however, had not yet begun. The work was done, but recovery had not fully happened. Momentum continued. Plans moved forward, and the body, already taxed, did not automatically reset. The role was finished. The exhaustion was not. By January 2008, filming for The Dark Knight had wrapped. The most demanding role of his career was complete. To the outside world, this should have marked relief. But momentum in Hollywood rarely slows cleanly. Heath Ledger was in New York, preparing for upcoming projects, reading scripts, attending meetings. Work did not stop. It simply shifted form. In the weeks leading up to January 22nd, reports later described ongoing sleep difficulties. Insomnia had been mentioned in previous interviews during intense creative periods. Lack of sleep does not look dramatic on camera. It looks like fatigue. It looks manageable. It becomes part of the routine. The danger is cumulative, not explosive. When exhaustion stretches over time, judgment can blur quietly. T-7 days, meetings, script discussions, planning. There was no public sign of crisis. Friends and colleagues described normal conversations. The future still existed in plans and calendars. Nothing suggested an ending. T-48 hours. Restlessness continued. Medication had reportedly been used to manage sleep. This detail would later become central in official findings, not as scandal, but as medical fact. The environment was calm. The apartment was ordinary. The moment did not announce itself as historic. January 22nd, 2008. He was found unresponsive in his Manhattan residence. Emergency services were called. Efforts were made. They were unsuccessful. The stillness that followed would echo across the industry within hours. News spread globally before sunset. The official medical conclusion, released weeks later, identified accidental overdose involving prescription medications. There was no dramatic twist, no theatrical ending, just a convergence of substances in a body already under strain. The explanation was clinical. The impact was not. The public reaction was immediate and fragmented. Shock, grief, disbelief. For many, the Joker performance had not yet been seen in full context. The magnitude of what he had created would only become clear months later. At that moment, there was only absence, an unfinished conversation. It is important to pause here. Final days often get distorted by rumor and myth. The case file resists that temptation. What is confirmed remains confirmed. What was reported remains reported. The core truth is simpler and more human. Exhaustion, medication, vulnerability. No villain behind the curtain. No symbolic ending worthy of cinema. The irony is painful. The performance that would redefine a generation of villains was about to be released. The applause was imminent. But he would never hear it. There was no dramatic farewell, just silence in an apartment, and a world left, trying to reconcile the smile on screen with the stillness that followed. Months after his passing, when The Dark Knight finally reached audiences, something unexpected happened. The performance did not feel haunted by tragedy. It felt monumental. Heath Ledger had not merely played the Joker, he had reshaped the blueprint of cinematic villains. The voice, the stillness, the calculated unpredictability. It set a new standard. What could have been remembered only through loss became immortalized through craft. In 2009, he was awarded the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor posthumously. The standing ovation was not only for a role, but for a career trajectory that had been accelerating toward artistic depth. It was recognition delayed, not created. The applause he never heard became part of his legacy. But legacy is more than trophies. It is influence. After Heath's Joker, antagonists were written differently, more psychological, less theatrical. Actors spoke about immersion more openly. Directors cited his performance as a reference point. The ripple extended beyond one film. It altered tone across an industry. Yet the most important part of the legacy lives outside cinema. His story invites reflection about ambition, intensity, and the invisible cost of constant excellence. The myth of the tortured genius is seductive, but incomplete. Dedication is powerful, so is balance. The world remembers the laugh because it was unforgettable. But the silence reminds us that even the most transformative artists are human. And that is the part of the story we cannot afford to ignore.